Sermon text is the Old Testament reading from this past Sunday. The Psalm 19 was the psalm from this past Sunday as well. Exodus 21 through 17. This is, of course, the Ten Commandments. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that's in heaven above, or that's in the earth beneath, or that's in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children of the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that's in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. In many and various ways, God spoke to his people of old by the prophets. But now in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. What I'd like to do tonight is I'd like to take a fresh look at the Ten Commandments. And we're not going to look at any of the individual commandments. We're not going to go through them and talk about what the commandments mean. But just the commandments in general, I think, are worth taking a fresh look at, because I think that a lot of Christians are kind of confused by them. There's this sense that they're very, very important. All of you who've gone through confirmation know it's one of the 6 chief parts of Luther's small catechism, and so you study the Ten Commandments. And Luther says these are serious business. I'll give you a Luther quote here in a minute. It's a serious business, and we should take the Ten Commandments seriously, and we should obey them. But then we also are told, well, you can't obey them because you're sinful, and so they're really meant to drive you to Jesus. And so Christians are kind of conflicted, like, well, so do I have to obey them, or can I not obey them, or how does this work? Or am I supposed to sort of obey them, but I'm not really trying, but it's the Holy Spirit who's making me obey them? And I think it's worth taking a look at what the Ten Commandments are, what they aren't and what they are, and thinking about what their role is in the Bible, and maybe that will help us forward. And I think the hymn that we just sang is a really good way to do this. The hymn is sharp. It's about this view of the law that's not focused so much on do I have to obey it and why do I have to obey it, but this relationship with God and our actions. Like Jesus says in John chapter 14, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And the hymn says, love will make your obedience sweet. And that's really kind of the key, and that's kind of where I want to head tonight too. So first of all, let me start off by talking about what the commandments aren't about. And some of this is, most of you will be on board with this. The commandments are not about becoming a Christian. They're not how to become right with God, of course. More on that in just a few minutes. They're not about being a good citizen. They're not for just everybody. They're not for the general population to help people be good. I've got a friend who told me not too long ago that he was talking to a friend of his about the friend A. My friend is a believer. His friend B, we'll call him. It's not his real name. He's not a believer. But friend B was telling friend A, you know what's important? The important thing is the Ten Commandments. And the thing about, though, is it's not what the Ten Commandments are for. The Ten Commandments aren't for everybody. They were for God's people. More on that in a second, too. The Ten Commandments are also not God's way to create a more moral society. Some of you will remember, it's probably been a couple decades now, when Judge Roy Moore in Alabama had the Ten Commandments posted up in his courtroom. And a lot of Christians are like, yeah, put those up there. That's not what the Ten Commandments are for. The Ten Commandments are not for the American legal system. They're not for anybody except for God's people. They're a gift given to God's people for the reasons that I'll go into tonight. Now, is it nice to live next door to people who obey the Ten Commandments? Of course it is. I'm not saying that people shouldn't obey the Ten Commandments. And it's nice when people, unbelievers, kind of run into the Ten Commandments, either through luck or the gracious common grace of God, which allows people to know, okay, I shouldn't murder people. That's nice. But the Ten Commandments actually aren't for them. They're not benefited by keeping the Ten Commandments. It's not their identity. It wasn't given to them. What are they for? Well, there's a couple things that there's a couple things that they are about, things that they are for, that aren't the main thing, that sometimes we turn them into the main thing. All right? One of these things is this: the rules to keep now that we're Christians. All right, I'm saved by grace through faith. I believe that. But then you get the Ten Commandments, and those are the rules that you have to keep now, right? No, that's not what's going on there. It's not a test of your spirituality. It's not, God's checklist for the people who are Christians. It's not a checklist at all. Also, it's not, and it's not primarily, I should say this. We should keep the Ten Commandments. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying that's not what they primarily are about. Also, what is true but not primary is this: rules that we can't keep, but whose main job is just to make us feel guilty, so we want to trust in Jesus more. That's true, but it's not their main thing. And if I can speak to you Lutherans for a minute, a lot of times Lutherans emphasize this, and what they do is they marginalize the Ten Commandments and say, well, I can't keep them, ergo, I don't have to keep them because Jesus saves me. And that's not a move that any of us should make. Now, what are they about primarily? Before I do this, I'm going to give you three things that they're about. But can I make a quick rhetorical point? This is not the kind of thing I would do on Sunday morning, I don't think. But I'm going to do it now because it occurred to me in a conversation with a pastor in the area. We were talking about preaching, and he was pointing this out to me, and it was a really good point. There's kind of, in Lutheran sermons, there's kind of a standard boilerplate format, which isn't bad, but it goes like this. The sermon starts with law, and then it ends with gospel. And the pastor that I was talking to said, it doesn't need to be like that. You can actually start with the gospel. And so that's what I'm going to do tonight. So I was just telling you that up front. I don't always start with the law and end with the gospel. I'm going to start, the gospel is going to be in the front part of the sermon here. Just don't be confused or anything like that. Okay, that's rhetorical point over. What the Ten Commandments are about are three things. I mean, they're way more than this, but this is a good start. This will be a nice, fresh look here. First of all, the Ten Commandments are about God. The Ten Commandments actually are fundamentally about God. First of all, the Ten Commandments show us that God is a redeemer. Exodus 20, verse 2, starts off, the Ten Commandments start off this way: I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Before the commandments come is this statement of who God is. I'm the one who paid to take you out of slavery to myself. The Ten Commandments are about God being a redeemer. Now, so you can say, well, God is a redeemer. He says that, but what do the Ten Commandments have to do with that? Let me say it to you this way. There's a commentary by an ancient rabbi named Rabbi Ishmael, and the commentary that he wrote is on Exodus, and he says this little story here. Somebody asked him, this is a good question, I think. Somebody asked Rabbi Ishmael, said, why did God take so long to give the Ten Commandments? That's a good question, right? Why did God take so long to give the Ten Commandments? Adam and Eve sinned. Why didn't he just give them the Ten Commandments right after that and say, this is what I want you to do? He calls Abraham. Why didn't he say, Abraham, you're my guy. I'm going to save the world through your offspring. Here's circumcision. And now I'm giving you the Ten Commandments. Why didn't he do it then? Why did he wait 400 years? Why didn't he give it to Israel and Egypt? Why didn't he do it during the plagues? Why didn't Moses say, this is what God wants us to look like? Why did he wait until after the Exodus event, until the crossing of the Red Sea, the destruction of Pharaoh's armies, and the liberation of the people? Why did God wait until then? Here's what Rabbi Ishmael says to that question that he received from one of his students. He says, suppose a man entered a city and said, I will rule over you. The inhabitants would say to him, who are you and what have you done for us? It's a fair question. What would the man do? Rabbi Ishmael says he would build a city wall, he would build aqueducts, he would lead them in battle, and then he would declare, I will rule over you, and they would gladly say yes. God earns the right to give them the Ten Commandments by redeeming them first. When he gives them the Ten Commandments, there's no question about who this is. There's no question about whether he has a right to tell them what to do or not, because he is their redeemer. Remember, Redemption out of slavery isn't just freedom from slavery. So we Americans, we like that first part. It's not just freedom from slavery, it's freedom to a new reality. Redemption means to be bought back. God takes his cash. It's not really cash, Luther says. It's not silver or gold that we're redeemed with, but this is a quote from the Small Catechism. But with the precious blood of Jesus, this holy, innocent, bitter sufferings and death, we are bought out of the pawn shop of sin and slavery. But it's not, Jesus doesn't buy us out of the prison house of sin, and then we say, oh, thanks, man, that was rough in there. Okay, I'll see you next Sunday, Jesus. No, he buys us. He redeems us back to himself. He goes to the pawn shop, he gets his pocket watch out of there, and he sticks it in his pocket. He is the Redeemer, and the Ten Commandments are a sign that we have been redeemed. This is why I said the Ten Commandments are not for Judge Roy Moore's courtroom. They are for the redeemed people of God. The Ten Commandments are all about worship of the one true God, not about being better humans. But what does it mean to be God's people? What does it mean to be redeemed out of sin? What does it look like to be a freshly saved people? And the answer is the Ten Commandments. Redemption means freedom. It also means ownership, though. It's good when unbelievers obey the commandments, but the Ten Commandments are fundamentally a part of the relationship between God and his people. The second thing that the Ten Commandments tell us about God, there's three things here underneath the point about the Ten Commandments tell us about God. God is beautiful and desirable. The Ten Commandments tell us God is beautiful and desirable. Now, this is weird because we're used to Lutherans. We're used to being like, no, the Ten Commandments are like bad. Like they crush us. They make us aware of our sin. I read the Ten Commandments and I should be like weeping with grief over how sinful I am. I'm not saying that's not true. But if that's all you're doing, then you're missing part of the story of what the law is about. And actually, it's great that they include whoever they is, the people who created the Common Lectionary. Make Psalm 19 one of the readings here. Psalm 19, verses 7 through 10 says this: the law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. So all these things about the law of God. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. Does the law make your heart happy? If it doesn't, then we're not actually getting what the law is about. We're not getting to the law being a reflection, a communication straight from the heart of the God who passionately loves us. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. Check out this. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey and drippings of the honeycomb. David's sitting there and he's writing this psalm, and he's thinking, I just love God's law so much. I love the Ten Commandments so much. What is like the best analogy I can think of for how much I love the Ten Commandments? And the two things he comes up with that he really, really loves that come close to comparing in his mind, but they're not as good as, is money. It's better than gold, and sweet food. Honey and sweets, honey and the honeycomb. David didn't have access to cane sugar or beet sugar. If they wanted sweet food, honey was the only really way to go. And so David thinks, what are my two favorite things? Money and sweets. And the law of God is better than eating dessert. It's better than getting rich. Is that how we feel about it? You know why we don't feel about that way about the Ten Commandments? Well, part of it is because it's been programmed into us. The Ten Commandments are your enemy. God's trying to crush you. He wants you to be miserable, so you turn to him. Again, that's true, but it's not the primary thing. The reason why we don't love the Ten Commandments like David does, the reason why we don't think the Ten Commandments are better than dessert or better than getting rich, is because we don't trust God. Because we think that God gives us his commandments as some sort of, maybe he's sneaking in some sort of quid pro quo where I'll save you, but I want you to check off this list. Or I'll save you, but I don't want you getting too happy, so I'm going to give you this law so you'll be miserable from time to time when you think about how lousy you are. And a God who would do that is not a God to be trusted. It's a God playing games with us. It's the God who's made some sort of weird salvation, faith transaction with us that we're happy to do business with, but we don't see him as Father. We don't see him as lovely. We don't see him as desirable. Let me ask you this question. What if you wanted to learn how to play the piano and Mozart begged you and said, I will volunteer. I want to spend time with you. I will teach you to play the piano. What if you were like, I wish I knew more about investing. And Warren Buffett said, hey, I will sit down with you. I'll come over. We'll sit down at your kitchen table 3 nights a week. I'll tell you everything that I do. I'll give you directions. I'll tell you which stocks to pick, but I will tell you why those are the stocks I would pick. And I will train you on how to do value investing like I do. What if you wanted to learn how to play golf and Annika Sorenstam said, I will teach you everything I know? Would you be resentful? Would you say, well, I can't be as good as Warren Buffett. Here he is, sits at my table and tells me what to do, and I can't ever be as good as him. Would you do that? Would you say about Mozart, he's always bossing me around. He knows I'm not a great pianist. Or would you be thrilled to death that the people who are the best in the universe at this thing love you enough to say, I want to spend time with you so I can shape you to look more. You're not ever going to be as good as Mozart or Annika Sorenstam or Warren Buffett. But I want to shape you so that you begin to be more and more like this. Would you not be thrilled? So then why is it when we read God's law, we're not thrilled? Because we don't trust him. We don't believe it. We don't believe the gospel, that he is on our side. David does. And if we come to the law and we don't get that God is beautiful and desirable, better than sweets and better than money, we're not really understanding the 10 Commandments. Third thing about God, and this will be a quick one, God is sovereign. I mean, this is the easy call, right? He gives rules. This is kind of frustrating. It'd be nice if we could just do what we want, right? We don't think like that in the rest of life, right? Any coach who refuses to give his team directions or plays or instructions on how to get better, everybody knows I'm pulling my kid off that team. If you put your kid in a school and the teacher in the school, your kid's teacher, doesn't give any sort of instructions, doesn't do any discipline in the class, doesn't ever tell the students how to get better at math or at reading or at grammar, you'd pull your kids out of that school, wouldn't you? Any parent who won't tell their kids what to do is not a parent worth having. Any God who won't tell us what to do with our private parts, any God who doesn't tell us what to do with our mouths, any God who doesn't tell us what to do with our money or with our time or with our relationships, isn't a God worth worshiping. And part of the 10 Commandments is him saying, I'm on your side, I love you, I'm your father, so I am going to tell you what to do. Let's not buck against that. And when we do, let's be repentant. The 10 Commandments are fundamentally about God. Second thing, these other two are shorter than the first one. The 10 Commandments are about life. What I mean is like living life, real life. Luther, there's this great quote by Luther in the Large Catechism. He says this, anyone who knows the 10 Commandments perfectly knows the entire Scriptures. Luther loved the 10 Commandments way more than Lutherans love the 10 Commandments. It's a weird kind of thing. Anybody who knows the 10 Commandments perfectly knows the entire Scriptures. Now, what does he mean by knows? He doesn't mean memorizes, understands, agrees to. He has a less modern definition of know, which is lives in, practices, does. The 10 Commandments are to be practiced. The 10 Commandments are not something to agree to, in spite of how we do confirmation usually, because I don't, maybe just the only way you can do it is to say, here's the 10 Commandments, do you agree to them? It's, that you can't avoid that if you're going to be a Christian, but the 10 Commandments aren't meant to be memorized or agreed to, they're meant to be practiced. They're meant to be lived out. The whole point of having Mozart or Warren Buffett or Annika Sorenstam come over to your house and teach you what to do is to practice with them and then go do it. Get on the golf course and start hitting balls. Start putting your money into some different stocks. Actually sit down at the keyboard in front of a room full of people and play beautiful music. The 10 Commandments aren't something like, oh yeah, I agree with that. They're something that we should be practicing. And I say we quite intentionally because they're meant to be done in community. All of these things, all the 10 Commandments, none of them are private. If I'm not supposed to covet, it's your stuff I'm not supposed to covet. If I'm not supposed to steal, it's your stuff I'm not supposed to steal. If I'm supposed to take the name of the Lord with meaning and with weight and not in vain, it's God whose name I'm supposed to not take in vain. All this is to be meant to be practiced in relationship with God and with each other. And the Christian church, because we are a redeemed people, have been given this practice set. We're not going to be perfect at it. God knows that. But it doesn't mean we don't have to do it, or we should just be ashamed that we can't do it. No, we should actually start practicing these things. They're good to practice. If this makes us uncomfortable, it might be because we falsely believe that salvation by faith means salvation happens up here, and anything I do out here is just works. No, that's not the case. Paul talks frequently about the obedience of faith. Believing in Jesus, my supervisor said to a class in a Pauline epistles class just the other day. This is great. I thought it was just kind of a throwaway line, but I thought it was good. Does Peter believe in Jesus? Yes. Mentally, he believes in Jesus. But when Jesus says, Peter, come on out of the boat, Peter has to get out of the boat. This is what we call the obedience of faith. To say, I believe in God, but I don't need to obey his commandments because Jesus just saves me, is what Bonhoeffer calls cheap grace. It's not grace at all. It's not salvation at all. It's meant to be practiced. It's meant to be lived. It's a part of our communal life with each other. We protect it. Luther's, I'm not going to run through these because I didn't want to run through each one individually, but go home and grab your copy of Luther's Small Catechism and see how he explains each one of the commandments. How there's a negative to it, but also a positive. God wants us to be doing things with his law. The commandments are about real life, not about what we think, but about real life. And finally, the Ten Commandments, this might be surprising to you, maybe. The Ten Commandments are about evangelism. It's actually one of the main things the Ten Commandments are about. Now, I've quoted this text quite a bit in the past few 5 or 6 months because I've been thinking about it quite a bit. But Exodus 19 is the chapter right before Exodus 20. Of course, that's how numbers work. But he says in Exodus 19, he's telling them why I'm about to give you the Ten Commandments. And he says this line, it's good. The Lord calls Moses out of the mountain saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Redemption. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine. I own all the nations, but you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Israel, I've chosen you to be a nation of priests, a nation of people whose job it is to be the go-between between me and the Egyptians and the Greeks and the Arabians and the Assyrians and all the rest. God's people from the very beginning were supposed to be evangelists. We're supposed to reflect God, the creator God, the covenant God, to everybody else. And the way that he gave them to do it was the Ten Commandments. He didn't give them lessons on door-to-door evangelism. He didn't give them lessons in apologetics. And these are all fine things too. What he did was he gave them a way of life. And when you look throughout the rest of the Bible, almost all, when the biblical writers talk to me and you, the common people sitting in the church about evangelism, it's hardly ever, I've got like 4 great points that if you say A, B, C, and D, the atheist will be like, oh, dang it, you got me. It's hardly ever this logical, rational, propositional stuff. It's almost always look this way, act this way, walk this way. I'll give you 2 examples real quick. One's from Matthew chapter 5. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Obey the Ten Commandments so that people will see our good works and give glory to our Father who's in heaven. Because this promise of being the chosen nation is ours now. Peter, after the resurrection, says in 1 Peter 2, and he takes this language straight from Exodus 19, and he says, you are a chosen race. Church, you are the chosen race. You are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. We are the new priest. We are all priests, conduits of God's grace and love in Jesus Christ to the world around us, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Peter says in a few verses, the payout from that, you are, he says in 1 Peter 2:9, you are what Israel is supposed to be. You are a chosen nation, a royal priesthood. Here's the payout. Keep your conduct, this is 3 verses later in 2:12. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation. This is the way the church has been called to evangelize, not by being like expert debaters, but by loving God, being close to him, allowing his commandments to become our gracious choice because we love him so much. And then the world can see what God actually looks like because we actually look like God. We look like a people who are faithful, like the God who we claim is faithful is. We look like a people who are truth tellers, like the God who is a truth teller is. We begin to reflect him. That's how evangelism happens. The church is called to be what Adam and Eve were called to be but failed. The renewed humanity now in Jesus. And when God gives us the Ten Commandments, he gives us this image of his character, what Jesus looks like, and says, come join with me. I'll help you. I'll train you. But come walk with me. Come look like me. Come reflect me to the world around us. The Ten Commandments are fundamentally about the nature of God. They're fundamentally about a way of life that God has called his church to. Not doctrines to be believed in mainly, but a way of life to be lived. And they're fundamentally about reflecting his character to the world. They're fundamentally about evangelism.